Amma had spent the past week working double shifts on an emergency assignment at the hospital. As a nurse in Accra, she was used to long hours and little rest, but this week had drained every drop of her energy. On her way home, she kept imagining the quiet of her house, the calm of her garden, and the comfort of finally sleeping in her own bed. All she wanted was peace. But as soon as she turned onto her street, the sound of loud music hit her before she even reached her gate. Cars were lined up along the road, blocking part of her driveway. She frowned, confused, wondering if her neighbors were throwing a party. Yet when she stepped closer, she saw balloons tied to her fence and people crowding her yard. Her heart skipped with a mix of shock and excitement. For a moment, she thought, could this be for me? Maybe her friends and family had planned a surprise welcome home party. After all, she had been gone for days working under pressure. Perhaps this was their way of showing love. But as she stood at the edge of the crowd, no one rushed to greet her. Instead, strangers raised their glasses, relatives laughed, and the music grew louder. No one even noticed her arrival. The tables she had bought, the flowers she had planted, the lights she had strung in her garden, everything was being used, but not for her. Slowly, reality sank in. This wasn't her celebration. It wasn't for her at all. It was her own relative's party, thrown right in her garden without her. Amma stood frozen at the edge of her own garden, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Her cousins, Ya and Efua, noticed her at last. Instead of welcoming her, they burst into laughter. Ya, holding a drink in his hand, shouted over the music, "Oh, look who finally came. This isn't your space anymore. We're using it." His words cut through the noise, sharp and mocking. Efua joined in, smirking as if Amma was a stranger in her own home. "You're always at the hospital, always busy, always working. You don't even live here anymore. Why should this place belong to you?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm, and the people around them laughed. Amma's chest tightened. She had sacrificed her sleep, her youth, even friendships just to build this house and garden. Every flower, every chair, every stone was something she had worked for. And now, her own family stood in front of her, acting like it was theirs. Guests she didn't even recognize turned to stare. Some whispered, others pointed. A few of them laughed openly, as if she were the punchline of a joke. One man shouted, "So this is the nurse everyone talks about?" Too busy saving strangers to enjoy her own life. The crowd chuckled. Another woman added loudly, "That's why she's still single. Work, 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 no husband, no family. What a waste." Amma's throat burned, but she said nothing. She watched Ya toss his car keys to a friend, bragging about how the garden was now the family's favorite hangout spot. Efua leaned closer to Amma and whispered just loud enough for others to hear. "You thought you were better than us because you bought a house. But look, without family, what are you? Nothing." The laughter around her grew heavier, pressing on her like a weight. She felt like a stranger in the one place she had thought was her sanctuary. For years, she had endured their snide remarks about her being unmarried, about spending too much time at work, about living alone. She had ignored them, thinking her success would speak for itself. But now, surrounded by people eating her food, drinking under her lights, and stepping on her grass, she realized they had no respect for her sacrifices. Her cousins raised their glasses in mock cheers while she stood in silence, their voices echoing with cruelty. What hurt most was not the noise or the party, but the realization that the people she had once called family had turned her hard work into a stage for their mockery. And all she could do was stand there, shocked and wounded, watching her dignity being trampled in her own yard. Amma didn't shout. She didn't push anyone or raise her voice above the music. She simply stood still, her arms folded, watching. The same garden she had dreamed about for years, the one she watered every morning before work and cared for on her few free weekends, was now a mess. Plates with half-eaten food lay on the grass. Empty bottles were stuffed between the flower pots. Someone had even pulled up one of her chairs and placed their feet on it like it was an old stool. The careful order she had built was being trampled under careless laughter. Inside, Amma's chest burned with anger, but she held it in. She knew her words would only feed them, give them another reason to mock her. So she chose silence. And in her silence, her mind drifted back to the past. The nights she came home after 12-hour shifts, so tired she could barely stand, yet still managed to save a little money to buy bricks for the wall around this very house. She remembered the times she walked past Ya and Efua, her cousins, who laughed at her dusty uniform and muttered that she was killing herself for nothing. Not once did they offer help or even a word of encouragement. Now here they were, dancing on her lawn, spilling drinks on the tiles she had saved 3 months' salary to install. Her heart ached, but her face gave nothing away. She stood so quietly that a few people began to notice her presence. They shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her but quickly looking away. Still, no one stopped. Ya smirked, thinking her silence meant defeat. Efua rolled her eyes and whispered to someone, "See? She can't even talk. She knows we're right." Their laughter rose again, but Amma remained calm. What they didn't realize was that her quiet anger was heavier than any shouting could be. She was remembering every insult, every sneer, every time they had called her lonely or obsessed with work. She was remembering the pain of struggling alone while they lived carefree, never once lifting a hand to help. Her silence unsettled them, though they pretended otherwise. A few guests grew uneasy, sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what. Amma let them laugh, let them think she was weak. In truth, her silence was not weakness. It was the deep calm before a storm. She was measuring every word she would not say, every argument she didn't need to make, because she already knew something they didn't. As the music thumped and her garden sank deeper into chaos, Amma stood like a stone at the edge of it all. She didn't move. She didn't break. And though her relatives mistook her stillness for surrender, her quiet eyes told a different story. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. As Amma stood there in silence, watching the chaos in her garden, she felt an odd calmness settle over her. The anger was still there, but behind it was something else, something almost like relief. The truth was, these people didn't know the full story. What they thought was their victory was actually nothing more than a temporary performance, because Amma had already made her move. Just before she left for her emergency assignment, Amma had gone to a quiet office in the city and signed a stack of papers. The ink was still fresh when she boarded the bus to work. Those papers sealed a deal with a local real estate company. Her beloved house, the garden she had nurtured, the walls she had built with years of sacrifice. All of it was no longer hers. She had sold it. The transaction was finalized just 2 days before she returned. It wasn't a decision she made out of anger or defeat. In fact, Amma had been planning it for months. She wanted to upgrade her life, to reward herself after years of sacrifice. She had been saving, consulting, and looking at new properties quietly, without telling a soul. Not even her closest friends knew. She wanted it to be her own private surprise, a gift to herself for all the nights she worked when the rest of the world was asleep. She had kept it a secret for a reason. Amma knew her relatives well enough to expect jealousy, interference, and endless gossip. If she had told them, they would have found ways to spoil the joy of her new beginning. So she kept the papers hidden, tucked away in her bag during her long shifts, holding on to the thought of a bigger, better home waiting for her. Now, as she watched Ya and Efua laugh like they had conquered her, Amma almost smiled. They thought her silence was weakness. They thought this garden was still hers to defend. But in truth, they were celebrating on land that didn't even belong to her anymore. Every plate they dropped, every bottle they broke, every insult they threw, it was all wasted. Because the place they clung to so proudly was already gone. Amma stood with her arms crossed, letting the music pound and the laughter roll. Inside, she felt a growing strength. Soon, they would learn the truth. Soon, they would realize that while they were busy mocking her, she had already outgrown. Her life had moved on to something greater, something they couldn't touch. The garden they trashed wasn't her future, it was her past. And the real surprise was still waiting, hidden behind signed papers, and a deal none of them saw coming. Amma didn't need to fight for this house anymore. She had already let it go. And in letting go, she had already won. The music was still blasting, people were still laughing, and plates were being refilled when Amma finally stepped forward. For a long time she had stayed quiet, letting them think she was powerless. But now, she raised her voice just enough to cut through the noise. "Who gave you permission to be here?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. The chatter died down for a moment. Heads turned. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but Ya only grinned, leaning back in his chair like a king in his palace. "Permission?" he repeated loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Family doesn't need permission. This is our space. You're just lucky we even used your boring garden." The crowd roared with laughter. Some clapped, others whistled. Efua smirked and shook her head as if Amma was a child asking a foolish question. "Honestly, Amma," she said, raising her glass, "if you weren't always locked up in the hospital, maybe you'd know how to enjoy life. We're doing you a favor." Amma's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed steady. She looked at the mess around her. Trash on the ground, drinks spilled across her tiles, strangers lounging on her chairs. For a second, it hurt. This was the home she had built with her sweat, her money, her sacrifices. But then the hurt passed, replaced by something stronger. She let the laughter echo for a moment before she spoke again. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too soft for such a noisy crowd. "Then I hope you all enjoyed your last party here." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into water. The laughter stumbled and faded. Some people frowned, confused. Ya chuckled again, trying to shake it off. "What's that supposed to mean? You think you can stop us? You've already lost, Look around you." Amma didn't answer right away. She simply gave him a small, knowing smile, the kind of smile that unsettles more than an argument ever could. Efua rolled her eyes, trying to dismiss it, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of uncertainty on her face. Guests whispered to each other. The shift in Amma's tone, the confidence in her words, it didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like something else, something they couldn't place. A few people began to sense that the nurse they mocked was holding back more than just anger. Amma didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Her message was clear enough. She turned her eyes away from Ya and Efua, scanning the crowd as if she were looking past them, already thinking beyond this house, beyond this garden. Her silence now wasn't weakness. It was control. The music started again, forced and awkward. But the energy had changed. Underneath the laughter, unease spread like smoke. None of them knew exactly why, but for the first time that night, Amma wasn't the one who looked out of place. They were, and her words kept echoing in their minds. Their last party here. Just as the uneasy silence settled over the party, the sound of an engine rolled down the street. A sleek black car stopped right in front of Amma's gate. Its polished surface gleamed under the garden lights, catching everyone's attention. The laughter faded into murmurs as the door opened and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. He carried a folder under his arm, and the way he walked, calm, confident, with no hesitation, made it clear he wasn't just another guest. The crowd shifted, curious. Some thought maybe Amma had finally called the police. Others assumed he was some important friend she had invited. Ya leaned back in his chair, still smirking. Efua whispered something in his ear and laughed. The man reached the center of the garden and cleared his throat. His voice was deep and steady, carrying over the noise of the music. Good evening. I'm here on behalf of the new owner of this property. I need to inform you that as of 2 days ago, this house and the land it stands on no longer belong to Madame Amma. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted to Amma, waiting for her reaction. For a split second, Ya burst out laughing. So that's it? You're being kicked out of your own house? No wonder you're so quiet tonight. His laughter spread to others, who clapped and cheered like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Amma didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched. The man in the suit waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Perhaps you misunderstood. Madame Amma is not being evicted. She sold this property, legally and completely, to my company. The sale was finalized, and she is no longer responsible for it, which means that all of you, he gestured at the crowd of relatives and strangers, have no right to be here. You'll need to leave immediately. The laughter stopped at once. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on the music, even though the speakers were still humming in the background. People blinked at him, stunned. Efua's smile froze on her face, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. What do you mean leave? Ya finally asked, his voice cracking. The man calmly opened his folder and held up official papers. Here are the legal documents signed by Madame Amma. The property is no longer hers. And since none of you have permission from the new owner, you are trespassing. Our team will begin moving operations soon, and I suggest you clear the premises before. A heavy silence settled over the garden. For the first time all night, no one laughed. No one mocked. The reality sank in like cold water. They had been partying in a house that didn't even belong to them. Amma finally exhaled, her calm face almost unreadable. She didn't need to add a single word. The message had already been delivered louder than any argument she could ever make. The garden, which had been filled with loud music and laughter only moments ago, now fell into an uneasy hush. People shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, waiting for someone to say it wasn't real. But before they could recover, 2 white vans pulled up behind the sleek black car. The doors swung open, and a team of movers stepped out carrying clipboards, tape measures, and notebooks. They walked in briskly, wasting no time. One knelt to measure the width of the gate. Another paced along the walls of the house, scribbling notes. 2 more wandered into the garden, pointing at the chairs, the fence, even the tiled patio. Their movements were sharp, professional, as if they had done this hundreds of times. The crowd broke into whispers. What's happening? Someone asked. Are they really taking the place? Another voice muttered. No, this must be a mistake. Ya shot to his feet, his usual arrogance faltering. Hey, stop that, he shouted at the movers. This is family property. Nobody's taking anything without our say. The man in the suit didn't flinch. He calmly opened his folder again, pulling out stamped paper. Here is the signed deed of sale, bearing Madame Amma's name and thumbprint. This house, this land, this garden, it all belongs to my company now. We have every right to be here. You, on the other hand, do not. He held the papers up high enough for the nearest guests to see. The red official stamp glared under the lights, undeniable proof. The smug grins that had filled the yard earlier drained away. Efua's face went pale as she muttered, This can't be true. But it was. Every laugh they had thrown at Amma, every insult about her being too focused on work, now turned sour in their throats. They had mocked her inside a place that was no longer even hers. Worse, they had celebrated like they owned it, when legally, they were nothing more than trespassers. One by one, The guests began picking up their bags, avoiding Amma's eyes. Some quickly finished their drinks, embarrassed. Others slipped out toward the gate, not wanting to be caught in the middle of the humiliation. Phones came out as neighbors outside the fence started recording the scene. Y'all tried again, louder this time, his voice shaking. Amma, you can't just sell the house without telling us. We're your family. Amma finally looked at him, her face calm, almost unreadable. She didn't need to respond. The man in the suit spoke instead, his voice firm. She didn't have to ask for your permission. It was her property, not yours. That sentence cut deeper than anything Amma could have said. Ya's shoulders slumped, and Efua dropped her gaze. The garden that had been filled with arrogance just an hour ago now reeked of shame. The reality was clear. The party was over, and it had never belonged to them in the first place. The garden that once shook with music now echoed with silence and shame. Amma's relatives, who had been laughing and boasting only minutes before, were now scrambling to pack up their things. Plastic chairs were dragged noisily across the tiles. Half-torn balloons dangled from the fence. Plates of food were hastily wrapped in plastic bags. Some spilled on the ground as people rushed to gather what was left of their so-called party. Neighbors leaned over their walls and gates, whispering and shaking their heads. Some didn't bother to hide their smiles. Phones were lifted into the air, recording every moment. "Look at them," one neighbor muttered, her voice caught on video. "Acting like they own the place, and now see how they're running." Another whispered, "Poor Amma. They mocked her, but she had the last word without even shouting." Efua's face was tight with humiliation as she pulled down strings of lights, avoiding everyone's eye. Ya, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking. His pride wouldn't let him stay quiet. "This is selfish, Amma," he shouted, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "How could you sell this house without telling your family? We should have had a say." But his protest fell flat. A woman from the crowd, one of the neighbors, answered back immediately. "It wasn't your house to begin with. You mocked her, used her garden, and now you want to cry family? Please." The people nearby nodded, murmuring in agreement. Even some of the guests who had sided with Ya moments earlier slipped away quietly, embarrassed to be associated with. Amma didn't reply. She simply stood by the gate, her arms folded, watching as the same cousins who had laughed in her face were now forced to carry boxes, pull down banners, and sweep away their mess under the gaze of half the neighborhood. Every move they made was captured on phones, shared instantly across WhatsApp groups, and posted online. By the time night fully settled, clips of Ya's angry outbursts and Efua's sulking face were already trending. Short videos showed Amma standing tall and calm while her relatives argued with the man in the suit. Other clips showed movers measuring walls as confused guests shuffled out with their drinks still in hand. The captions were merciless. "Don't mock the one who worked hard. Karma is fast." Or "She built it, she sold it, she won." For Amma's relatives, the backlash was brutal. Comments poured in online, mocking their arrogance. Strangers who didn't even know Amma shared her story, praising her strength and calmness. Ya tried to save face, ranting about family loyalty in front of the cameras, but his words only made him look more desperate. In the end, the relatives left in silence, carrying their shame along with their decorations. The once proud party had turned into a public humiliation, burned forever into memory and into the internet. Meanwhile, Amma didn't need to post a word. The world had already spoken for her. The next morning, while the neighborhood still buzzed with gossip about the disastrous party, Amma quietly packed her last bag into her car. She didn't look back at the house she had just sold. The walls, the garden, the memories, they had served their purpose. Now it was time for something greater. Her drive to East Legan felt almost unreal. The streets grew wider, the houses taller, and the air carried a different kind of silence, calm, refined, free from chaos. When she finally pulled up to her new home, Amma sat in the car for a moment, staring at it. The house was bigger, brighter, standing proud with freshly painted walls and wide glass windows that caught the sun. The garden stretched even larger than her last one, filled with trimmed hedges, fruit trees, and space that seemed endless. As she stepped inside, her close friends were already waiting for her, cheering softly. They had brought a small cake, balloons, and drinks. Not a noisy crowd, not strangers, just people who truly cared for her. "Amma, you did it," one of them said, hugging her tightly. Another added, "All those nights you worked and barely slept, this is what it was all for. We're proud of you." Amma smiled, her heart swelling. For years, she had been mocked by her relatives for being single, for spending too much time at the hospital, for living a life they thought was dull. They never saw the nights she came home too exhausted to eat. They never saw her crying quietly over bills while still sending money back home. They never saw the part of success that was invisible, the struggle. Now, standing in her new living room, Amma finally felt the weight lift off her shoulders. Her friends clinked glasses, celebrating her not just for the house, but for her resilience. "You never bragged," one friend said. "You just worked and worked. Look at you now." Alma laughed softly, walking toward the balcony that overlooked her wide garden. She could already imagine mornings filled with peace, evenings sipping tea under the trees, and weekends hosting the kind of gatherings she chose, with people she trusted. Not chaos, not mockery, just peace and joy. In her heart, she knew this house wasn't just a home, it was proof of her journey. Proof that sacrifice pays off, even if others can't see it. The same cousins who mocked her for wasting her time on work never once offered a helping hand. Yet here she was, standing in a house far beyond their imagination, bought with her own sweat and discipline. Alma didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. She had already proven it to herself. And as laughter from her true friends filled her new home, she realized this was the life she deserved, quiet, beautiful, and hers alone. In the days that followed, Alma's story spread far beyond her street. The videos of her relatives being forced to pack up in shame traveled from phone to phone, each clip replayed with laughter and lessons attached. Neighbors shook their heads and said it was justice. Strangers online called it karma. Yaw and Efua, once so loud and mocking, could barely show their faces without whispers trailing behind them. Everywhere they went, people remembered the night they were humbled. Alma, on the other hand, woke up every morning in her new home to peace and silence. No loud music, no uninvited guests, just the sound of birds in her wide garden and the joy of knowing she had created this life herself. She smiled often now, her heart lighter, her spirit stronger. As she reflected on everything that had happened, one truth stood clear in her mind. Family is not defined by blood alone. Respect matters. Support matters. And anyone who belittles your sacrifices has no right to enjoy your blessings. Family who disrespects your effort doesn't deserve to enjoy your rewards, Alma said one evening as she sat with her friends in her new garden. Her words carried the weight of experience, and her friends nodded in agreement. Her relatives were left with shame and endless gossip, their arrogance turned into a cautionary tale. But Alma didn't waste time thinking about their downfall. She focused on her peace, her growth, her new chapter. Stronger, wiser, and freer than before, she finally had the life she had always dreamed of, one built on sacrifice, courage, and the quiet power of moving on.